I don't know why Chicago isn't calling us saying, please give us help. When you have, over just a short period of time, 50 murders and hundreds of people shot, I just give my love and hope to the family of the young woman who was stabbed this morning or last night in Charlotte by a madman.
This is Today as It Happened. Good Monday evening to you. I'm Holly Furfer, here with your chronological look at the biggest events and stories of the day. From Russia's largest attack yet on the Ukrainian capital of Kyiv, to a federal appeals court upholding the $83 million judgment against President Donald Trump in the defamation case brought by writer E. Jean Carroll. But first, this morning, we took a look at the Trump administration's efforts to ramp up immigration enforcement. South Korean workers rounded up by Immigration and Customs Enforcement last week are headed home. More than 300 South Korean workers detained in a Georgia immigration raid last week will be released and sent home. South Korea's government announced the deal Sunday after negotiations with the United States. Now, these workers were among hundreds of people detained Thursday at a Hyundai electric vehicle plant. South Korea's foreign minister will travel to the U.S. here today to finalize details. The raid stunned South Korea because it's a key U.S. ally. President Trump suggested some workers could stay to train Americans. All right, for more on this immigration crackdown, let's bring in Scripps News Washington correspondent Stephanie Liebergen for us now. Good morning, Steph. Why would the Trump administration make this kind of move?
Hey, Holly, good morning. Well, the immigration crackdown is, a central tenet of what the president is trying to do, in his second administration. And so he's certainly doesn't appear that he's worried about upsetting any diplomatic relationships in that immigration enforcement effort. So there were 475 people detained in this raid on Thursday at the Hyundai battery plant in southeast Georgia. Over 300 of them were South Koreans, as you noted. Some of those arrested entered the U.S. illegally. Some entered legally and they maybe overstayed their visa. Others maybe had an active visa, but that visa didn't allow them to work in the U.S. So there's a variety of situations that kind of led to the people who were detained last week. A variety of situations on what their exact immigration status is and how they got into the U.S. But the president put out on Truth Social, I think it was last night, stressing that he still wants international companies, Hyundai being a South Korean company, he still wants them to invest in the U.S. He still wants them to build manufacturing plants here, but he wants to make sure that employees that they hire are, if they are international employees from the company's home nation, that they are in the U.S. legally. But he also stressed in that Truth Social post that he wants these international companies building in the U.S. to be hiring American workers. That's a big part of the manufacturing push and the investment push that the president has been focusing on so much in his second administration as well. But as you noted, South Korean officials coming to the U.S. today to kind of try to finalize the notifications for getting those South Koreans, more than 300 of them, back home to South Korea. Looks like the country's going to charter a plane to get all of them back. But this is the immigration enforcement, something that has been a central part of the Trump administration and something that we're going to see continue in the coming weeks with these workforce raids and then immigration enforcements. Of course, we've seen it here on the streets of Washington, D.C. Undocumented immigrants have been a number of those, a high percentage of those arrested in the increased law enforcement effort we've seen in the last few weeks here in D.C.
And do we know if this is going to put that plant behind schedule? I mean, how is it actually going to affect the end result, which would be production of these electric vehicles? Do we have any idea yet?
I'm not really sure how this is going to impact production at that specific plant. Presumably, there's, I believe, about 1,200 workers at the plant as a whole. If you lose 475 of them, you lose, a little less than half of your workforce. Presumably, there's going to be an impact or a slowdown on production from that specific plant. But I don't have any details on what exactly that looks like, if they're going to be closed for a while, or what the impact is really on that local economy and that local community with so many people being uprooted and detained by that during that raid.
The ripple effect there. Okay, and Steph, let's talk about another issue on top of mind this weekend. President Trump once again talking about potentially sending the National Guard now to Chicago. Do we have any updates on that?
The president is continuing those threats that Chicago is going to be next on his crime crackdown and his crime focus. Of course, these threats coming right as the 30-day time limit for his takeover of the D.C. Police Department is coming up later this week. It's set to expire on Wednesday. The National Guard still going to be on the streets here in D.C. Federal law enforcement still going to be on the streets here in D.C. It's just that D.C. police element that the administration is going to kind of take their hand out of that pot a little bit with the 30-day limit. But the president hasn't lost sight of where he's targeting next, and that is Chicago. I want to play a little bit about what the president had to say about the city of Chicago over the weekend.
Chicago is a very dangerous place, and we have a governor that doesn't care about crime. I guess we could solve Chicago very quickly, but we're going to make a decision as to where we go over the next day or two. When you look at what happened to D.C. in a short period of time, honestly, it's amazing. Over a period of 12 days. In other words, on the 12th day, we had the crime just about solved. And right now, people are walking out. They're going out right now to restaurants all over D.C. Whereas if you go back a year ago or 6 months ago, nobody was going out.
Now, there has been a decrease in crime in Washington, D.C. Crime levels were already going down before the president's takeover. But with increased law enforcement on the street, crime has gone down even more. The question will be what happens in the city once that increased law enforcement is removed from the equation. Does the crime come back? Of the root causes of violent crime, have those been addressed in this takeover? And I think that's some of the concern that officials in Chicago are worried about if the president were to try to replicate this Washington, D.C. model in another city. That's, of course, always worth remembering. What the president can do here in Washington, D.C. and in the nation's capital is different than the control that he can have in any other major city or state across the country. In order to send the National Guard into Chicago, he would need to federalize the Illinois National Guard, something that the governor, J.B. Pritzker, is very opposed to. The mayor of Chicago has signed executive orders ensuring that the Chicago police don't coordinate with federal law enforcement, don't coordinate potentially with the National Guard. So there's going to be a lot of pushback if the president were to try to replicate this D.C. scenario in Chicago or in other cities. He has mentioned Baltimore as another city that he's targeted. I think he's talked about New Orleans, New York City. But Chicago certainly seems to be the focus of where the president might go next, but there's no timeline on whether he's actually going to follow through on those threats of a takeover of Chicago, but it's something that the city there certainly concerned about. City officials pushing back adamantly against any sort of takeover of Chicago.
All right, Scripps News Washington correspondent Stephanie Liebergen live for us. Thank you for your reporting this morning. Coming up on Today as It Happened.
This is a clear sign that Putin is testing the world, whether they will accept it or put it up with it.
You're watching Today as It Happened, Scripps News rundown of the biggest events and stories of the day. So let's jump right in.
It is obvious that Russia is trying to inflict pain on Ukraine and strike more brazenly. This is a clear sign that Putin is testing the world, whether they will accept it or put it up with it. Therefore, it is important that the statements of state and institutional leaders are followed up with strong actions, sanctions against Russia.
That was Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky after Russia launched its largest aerial attack on Ukraine since the war began. Now, let's bring in Anna Conkling for more on this. She's a reporter with Newsphere who is in Kyiv. And Anna, I mean, this strike hit a government building. So how concerned are President Zelensky and the Ukrainian government that this attack is aiming now at government structures? Are they seeing this as a sign of something?
I think part of the reason that this attack actually occurred is because Russia was able to overwhelm Ukraine's air defense systems so much. Ukraine's Air Force had warned residents before the attack began that there could be a massive attack on Ukraine. And around 3:30 in the morning is when residents awoke in Ukraine residents awoke in Kyiv to the sound of explosions, and they carried on until around 7:45. This has unfortunately been very common for residents of Kyiv over the last few months. And just after sunrise is when Ukraine's main government building was hit in this drone attack. And this is in a very heavily defended, heavily fortified area of Kyiv, where there are a lot of air defense systems. So it showed Russia's ability to really overwhelm even one of the most heavily defended areas of Kyiv. And over the last few months, part of the reason that Russia has been able to do such intense damage in Kyiv is that they've been using decoy drones that are being used along with drones that are being carrying in bombs with them. These are being used to overwhelm the systems, and they were used on Sunday. And there's no real way for Ukraine's air defense to know if these drones are carrying explosives or if they are decoys. They just know that they have to shoot down as many as they can. So this government building that was attacked, I think part of the reason was that these decoy drones were coming in and overwhelming Kyiv. And this government building, when it was hit, it was the top floor of the building, as you can see here, and there was smoke bellowing from the top floor. There were no casualties because nobody was in the building at the time. But elsewhere in Kyiv, there were residential buildings that were struck and there were casualties. At some of the places, residents stood at the site of the attacks while they were wrapped in blankets as they watched emergency workers search through the rubble of the destruction to try to find any survivors and to extinguish the fires. And when attacks occur, people often lose all of the remnants of their lives. Many become internally displaced people and they have few ideas of where to go or what to do next. And throughout Ukraine, at least 4 people were killed and 44 people were injured. And in Kyiv, the dead included a mother and her 1-year-old, and 7 people were hospitalized in Kyiv, including reportedly a pregnant woman. This is according to the Ukrainian broadcaster Scripps. She underwent reportedly a medically induced labor to try to save her unborn child. And in total, 20 people in Kyiv alone were injured. And Russia launched 805 drones and 13 missiles at Ukraine. So when you have these intense air attacks, it's kind of impossible to make sure that you're shooting down every drone that's coming into a city. And this record that was broken, though, it's important to note that just 2 months ago, on July 9th, is when Russia first launched another record-breaking attack. There were 728 drones that were targeting Ukrainian cities. And on August 28th, Russia launched the second largest air attack of the war. And this hit one of the EU buildings in Kyiv and also the British Council. So many residents I've spoken with in Kyiv say that they expect massive Russian missile attacks and drone attacks every week. A lot of people are sleeping in metro stations because they don't know if their areas are safe. But in places like the area with the cabinet of ministers, people expected that it would be a little bit safer because of all this air defense units around the area. But it just shows that nowhere in Ukraine is really safe from drone attacks.
And Anna, so are they considering this an escalation from Russia? And if so, I mean, what is this signaling to the Ukrainians and to the rest of the world?
I think that a lot of people, just regular civilians in Ukraine, would not necessarily say that this is an escalation of the war, because this attack that happened is very, common for them. Just because it hit a residential building versus a building by the government, it doesn't really make a difference for Ukrainians that have been living with this war for 3.5 years. I know that some of the politicians are saying that this is an escalation of the war, but I think it's too soon to tell right now. I mean, it's only been 1 day, so we'll just have to see if more attacks are coming in the next coming days, and there could be an escalation.
And you've been talking to people there on the ground in Kyiv. I mean, obviously, everybody is worried, everybody's concerned. You said they're sleeping in metro stations, but during the day, are they able to go about somewhat of a normal life, or what is life for them now?
People in Kyiv and actually throughout Ukraine, even near the front lines, are going about with their lives as best as they can after attacks happen. Often when I'm in some of the frontline areas of Ukraine, you can still see people sitting outside and drinking coffee while there's explosions in the distance. And in Kyiv, women are still going to hair appointments. They're getting their nails done. People are sitting outside at restaurants with their friends, drinking coffee or eating lunch. Children are running around on playgrounds just hours after these attacks happen. So people in Ukraine make sure to not let the war define them and control their lives. While these attacks are very frequent now in Kyiv, I think that there's a really strong resilience of Ukrainians to make sure that although these attacks are happening, that they don't let them really define them and let Russia control their narrative.
All right, Anna Conklin, thank you so much for joining this morning and for that really important update. And I want to let our viewers know you can get all of Anna's on-the-ground reporting on the NewsSphere app. Thank you, Anna. Stay safe. Elsewhere, attackers opened fire at a bus stop in North Jerusalem Monday morning, killing 5 people and injuring 12 others. Police say the gunman shot people waiting at the bus stop and also opened fire into a crowded bus. A security officer and civilian at the scene shot and killed those attackers. Hundreds of security forces responded to search for additional threats. Hamas praised the attack without claiming responsibility. An American social media influencer who was stuck at a Chilean airbase in Antarctica for 2 months returned to the mainland on Saturday. Ethan Guo was attempting to become the youngest person to fly solo to all 7 continents when he was detained. Chilean authorities said the 20-year-old lied about his flight plan and flew to Antarctica without permission. He was stranded at the base during the harsh Antarctic winter with no flights available out. A judge dropped charges after Guo agreed to donate $30,000 to a children's cancer foundation and leave the country. We'll be right back to continue our look at the day's top stories. Welcome back to Today As It Happened. Let's check back in on our daily briefing of the day's top stories. The Israeli army is stepping up attacks on residential buildings in Gaza City. The most recent attack was on a building where more than 30 families lived. Dozens of displaced people have been sheltering in tents set up around that building. The health ministry in Gaza said the bodies of 65 people killed by Israeli strikes have been brought to hospitals during the past 24 hours. About half of them were women and children. Senate Republicans say they're ready to change the rules to approve more of President Trump's nominees. Senate Majority Leader John Thune says he'll start the process this afternoon. This move comes as Democrats blocked almost all of Trump's nominations. It's the first time in recent history that the minority party has not allowed at least some quick confirmations. If Republicans act quickly, they could confirm more than 100 of the president's pending nominations as soon as this week. Democrats say changing the rules would be a mistake. Jury selection begins today for the man accused of trying to assassinate Donald Trump last year. Scripps News Group's Ethan Stein has the details.
Ryan Ruth's trial will start Monday with jury selection here at the federal courthouse in Fort Pierce. Today's hearing is to go over some of the procedural and jury instruction issues before the trial begins. We also obtained a list of new documents showing the evidence and witnesses prosecutors plan to call during the trial. Ruth is facing several charges, including attempted assassination against then presidential candidate Donald Trump nearly a year ago outside Trump International Golf Course in West Palm Beach. According to prosecution's witness list I obtained today, a majority of people testifying for prosecutors are from local and federal law enforcement. It includes a number of people from North Carolina, where Ruth is from, including a man who pled guilty to federal gun charges in connection with this case. Evidence-wise, prosecutors plan to present various state license plates found in the car Ruth was driving, security camera footage, and receipts from various businesses in Palm Beach County. I reviewed the list, which also includes various internet searches and messages related to guns, trips to other locations, including Mexico, and Trump's schedule. Ruth is representing himself. He told the court he plans to argue he did not have the intention of killing Trump and calling witnesses saying the gun did not work properly. About 180 people will be summoned for jury instruction. Prosecutors say they expect their side of the case to last about 2 weeks. In Fort Pierce, Ethan Stein, WPTV News.
A self-proclaimed science nerd took a chance and is the latest American to get a pig kidney. The New Hampshire man had the surgery about 3 months ago and is now heading back to work. The experimental surgery comes at a time when medicine is looking towards animals to help ease the shortage of donated human organs. And based on the success of ones done so far, the Food and Drug Administration approved pig producer eGenesis to begin a rigorous study of these types of transplants.
Literally within a day or two, I was back up and walking just circles around the transplant unit. and getting encouraged by the staff and other transplant patients. I just had an ultrasound yesterday on Wednesday, and he said, Dr. Riella said, my kidney's doing absolutely wonderfully. It looks great.
And police in Nepal have shot and killed 17 people protesting a government social media ban. Thousands of protesters were out on the streets in the capital after a decision to block most social media platforms for citizens. Those protesters breaking through barbed wire and pushing back police, who then opened fire. More than 140 others were injured in the protests supporting freedom of expression on those social platforms.
The Trump administration says it wants the Supreme Court to keep billions of dollars in foreign aid frozen. President Trump using a pocket rescission to withhold nearly $5 billion in aid that was approved by Congress. That is a rarely used power. Last week, a federal judge ruled that the move was likely illegal. The judge saying Congress must approve any decision to withhold that money. Nonprofits say as that case makes its way through the courts, the freeze has shut down urgent life-saving programs overseas. No word on whether if or when the Supreme Court will rule.
Coming up on Today as It Happened.
A lunatic just got up and started, it's right on the tape, not really watchable because it's so horrible, but just viciously stabbed. She's just sitting there. So they're evil people. We have to be able to handle that. If we don't handle that, we don't have a country.
And later.
So many of those individuals that were detained through that operation in Georgia, we are following the law. They are going to be deported.
Welcome back to Today as It Happened. I'm Holly Furfer, here with your daily rundown of the day's top stories.
A deadly stabbing in Charlotte, North Carolina could soon become a political flashpoint for the Trump administration. The suspect in this case is accused of stabbing a Ukrainian woman on a train back on August 22nd. Investigators saying the attack was unprovoked. That is 34-year-old DeCarlos Brown. He has a long criminal history. He's now charged with first-degree murder. Earlier today, President Trump had this to say about the attack.
I just give my love and hope to the family of the young woman who was stabbed this morning or last night in Charlotte by a madman, a lunatic. Just got up and started, it's right on the tape, not really watchable because it's so horrible, but just viciously stabbed. She's just sitting there. So they're evil people. We have to be able to handle that. If we don't handle that, we don't have a country.
A horrific murder on a light rail train in North Carolina caught on camera. Now local officials are facing tough questions about why the suspect was still on the street. 34-year-old DeCarlos Brown is now in custody and charged with first-degree murder after Charlotte-Mecklenburg police say he fatally stabbed Irina Zarutska on August 22nd. The video, released by the Charlotte Area Transit System, shows a man identified by police as Brown sitting behind Zarutska on the train before rising to stab her in the neck, completely unprovoked. According to court records, Brown has been charged dozens of times over the last decade, including felony larceny and robbery with a dangerous weapon. The Charlotte Observer reports that almost all the charges had been dropped. According to an obituary posted by a local funeral home, the 23-year-old victim was a Ukrainian refugee who fled the war with her mother, brother, and sister and was building a new life in the U.S. She was an artist with a degree in art and restoration who shared her creativity generously, gifting family and friends with her artwork. Charlotte's mayor opposed the release of the video out of respect for the victim's family. Transportation Secretary Sean Duffy criticized that on social media, accusing her of trying to hide the seriousness of the crime problem in her city. Stephanie Lieberman, Scripps News Group, Washington.
A federal appeals court has delivered a blow to President Donald Trump, upholding that $83 million defamation award to E. Jean Carroll, rejecting Trump's claim of presidential immunity, finding that award from the jury was both fair and reasonable. No comment yet from President Trump. We'll have more updates on this story as it becomes available. He is not going anywhere. Howard Stern has signed a new contract with Sirius XM Radio. He, of course, is the king of shock jocks. In recent days, poking fun at those rumors that his satellite radio show had been canceled and that he was being replaced by Bravo host Andy Cohen. That's why listeners first heard Cohen, who was then joined by Stern, who announced that he was very happy at SiriusXM. Howard Stern, by the way, has been with the company since 2006. That is when he inked that 5-year deal. He said he thought about retiring, but told his millions of listeners he is still very happy. The Supreme Court has cleared the way for federal agents to make those indiscriminate stops in Los Angeles just because they suspect the people are here illegally. A federal judge had ruled that the roving patrols were making arrests on things like race and language, but the conservative supermajority lifted that restraining order, saying that was not the case. Justice Brett Kavanaugh saying the restraining order went too far in restricting how immigration agents carry out their brief stops for questioning. Rule. We now have our first millennial saint, his nickname God's Influencer. It was announced during Mass at the Vatican Sunday, Pope Leo canonizing Carlo Acutis. He is the young Italian man who started a website to document miracles and talk about faith. He died of leukemia back in 2006.
Up next on Today's It Happened.
We do have outbreaks in Florida, just like every state, and we manage those. So there are no new special procedures that need to be made. When we have outbreaks of different diseases, we manage them just as always.
Welcome back to Today As It Happened. I'm Holly Furfer. Okay, let's jump right back into the rundown of our top stories of the day.
Florida Department of Health, in partnership with the governor, is going to be working to end all vaccine mandates in Florida law. All of them. All of them. Your body is a gift from God. What you put into your body, is because of your relationship with your body and your God. I don't have that right. Government does not have that right.
Seems those sweeping changes to Florida's childhood vaccine requirements may not be that sweeping at all. In fact, they might only include chickenpox and a few other illnesses. This revelation coming a day after Florida Surgeon General told CNN his state has not done studies or even a study to see what might happen if the vaccine mandates end. Joel Lopez of our Scripps News Group is live right now in West Palm Beach, Florida. Joel, there is a lot to unpack here, so let's start with what vaccines will students be required to have and when exactly will this take effect?
Yeah, it's important to note that all vaccines aren't being eliminated. I reached out to the Florida Department of Health, who told me that vaccines for Hep B, chickenpox, hip influenza, and diseases like meningitis will be removed from that mandate, but vaccines for measles, polio, tetanus, and more will still be required under Florida law.
So, Joel, lawmakers need to decide, I guess, on those sweeping changes. What are they, and what are Floridians where you are saying about childhood vaccines?
Yeah, to kind of extend that list of what's going to be no longer required is going to take a whole other push from state leaders. But families and parents that I've spoken with say they're kind of in the middle. They're not entirely against vaccines, but they do like that decision where they're going to make that choice for themselves as to whether or not they're going to get their kids vaccinated and for what.
That is Joel Lopez with our Scripps News Group in West Palm Beach, Florida. Joel, as always, we thank you very much. Now, on the subject of vaccines, Democratic-led states are going in just the opposite direction to protect access to vaccines everywhere. Minnesota Governor Tim Walz on Monday becoming the latest blue state governor out with an executive order to ensure the residents don't lose their chance to get vaccinated. Now, vaccine policy is once again front and center at the national debate. Let's go right now to Scripps News political director Andrew Rafferty, who joins me in the studio. And Andrew, I guess the question is, how are voters reacting to the changes that we're seeing with regards to vaccine policies?
Yeah, well, Del, I think there are some real warning signs for the Trump administration. If you look at the actual data and surveys, and specifically the face of that message, which is Robert F. Kennedy Jr. as the leader of Health and Human Services. Look at this on the screen right now. This is opinion favorability of RFK. You see it at just 37% favorable, 50% unfavorable. Worth noting that is lower than where President Trump is, who's normally in like the low 40s, which is not a particularly strong position to be in. RFK down even lower. And then when you talk about, is he quote unquote following the science? You still see that about 49%, a plurality of respondents say no, they don't think he is following the science when it comes to these issues on vaccines. And what we've seen in Florida, and you just heard our reporter there, Joel, talking about this, is it does seem that even that initial announcement from the Surgeon General in Florida last week is getting a little bit more context. There are vaccines that are being going to continue to be mandated. It seems like the polling shows people still believe in vaccines, especially when you're talking about your kids' health, if they should be protected when they go to school. And that's why some of this is politically a little tricky. You don't see Donald Trump weighing in very directly. Of course, after that Senate hearing last week, he did say that he supported Robert F. Kennedy, but you don't see him mixing it up in the same way that he does on a lot of others.
Raf, how does this affect what is a bifurcated populace, really, when it comes to elections? We have half of the population over the age of 65, half of childbearing age. What about the COVID vaccine? Because this affects the people over the age of 65. Are Americans as suspicious, I guess, as RFK is with regards to COVID?
You know, it's interesting because there is certainly a lot of people who say they no longer have it in their rotation. I think the polling shows about 46% say, you know what, I went through that, I did the COVID vaccine, maybe I didn't, I don't need it anymore. But they still feel, a majority of the country at least, that it is safe and it is effective. So what they're saying, about 60% in that same poll that we've been talking about, is that, yeah, even though I don't want to actually get the shot, I don't think there's anything necessarily wrong with it. I'm not necessarily buying this idea that maybe there are these unforeseen health consequences, as you heard Robert F. Kennedy talking about in that congressional hearing last week. Also worth noting that RFK is not seen as a particularly trustworthy ambassador of medical advice overall. And though we have seen our major institutions, including the CDC, lose trust over time, which has been a trend through everything from the Supreme Court to Congress to religious institutions, so there's still a much higher percentage of the population who says they trust the advice of the CDC over RFK directly. So it will be interesting. Of course, the president there, this was during the campaign, he went out on a limb sort of to not only get RFK's endorsement, but also put him in such a high profile position in his administration, letting him quote, go wild on healthcare. But there's a lot of Americans outside of that MAHA base who are very concerned about what's going on.
Raf, have we blurred the lines between personal liberties and science? Because a lot of this goes back to the mask debate. Yeah. I don't want to wear a mask. I don't want the government to tell me to wear a mask. Right. Now I don't want the government to tell me whether I should get a vaccine. May not mean that they don't believe in vaccines.
Right, and it's the difference between, quote unquote, mandating something, which I think Democrats probably post-COVID came away with this idea that, well, you know, if you're going to mandate things, that could potentially blow up in your face in terms of political popularity. But mandating versus attacking the safety or efficacy of vaccines, that seems like a limb that has gone too far for most of the population. And so that's why you're seeing, like, even Tim Walz, who you talked about earlier today, it's about protecting access and about protecting people's, because it's a choice for individuals too. It's a choice to say, I want to be able to get the COVID vaccine, even if I'm not 65 or have what the CDC says is an underlying condition.
Final question. I keep seeing Tim Russert with that Florida chalkboard. Yeah. This is going to be dicey in Florida because it's got so many theme parks. And I'm already hearing from people saying, I don't want to go to Florida if my child may be on a ride in one of those theme parks next to somebody that's not vaccinated.
Yeah, and look, I won't get too far into the health because that's not my expertise, but knowing just what a beacon Florida is for vacationers, for people who want to go south, especially with young kids, for spring break or what have you. Obviously, if you're talking about the relevancy of a state and the potential, issues with a state's health, Florida is probably one of the most popular states that Americans like to travel to on vacations, whether it's to the beach, to the theme park, and even if it is just confined to school-age children, there no doubt will be concerns about the safety of going there if you have somebody's...
For that matter, just retire.
Yeah, that too. Yeah.
Andrew Rafferty, our political director. Andrew, as always, we thank you.
Coming up on Today As It Happened.
rolling back consumer protections when it comes to delayed flights, or when you're allowed to leave a job. I'm Avajoy Burnett. Coming up, what the Trump administration's reversal of these protections mean for you.
Welcome back to Today As It Happened, Scripps News debrief of our top stories of the day. So let's get to it.
This week will mark 30 days since President Trump took over Washington, D.C.'s police department. That is the legal limit of his authority. This past weekend, thousands protesting the federal takeover, with the largest march since the effort began. Postal traffic in this country dropping 80%. United Nations Postal Agency saying that is the result of the Trump administration ending a tariff exception. That exception covered packages worth $800 or less. The union saying 88% of operators have now suspended some or all of their services coming into the United States until they figure out how and who will pick up the tab. Those new rules went into effect on August 29th. The Trump administration rolling back two major Biden-era laws meant to protect consumers. One affects air travel that can be such a headache, the other affecting millions of American workers. Scripps News legal affairs correspondent Avajoy Burnett is live in our D.C. newsroom. And Avajoy, tell us exactly about these rollbacks that we're talking about here.
Hey there, Del. Well, one policy was meant to help people who may be stuck in an airport because of a flight cancellation or delays. And then another one was meant to determine when someone is able to leave a job if they are under contract. But what we do know is that some companies pushed back against this, and now the Trump administration is responding. Previous attempts by the Biden administration to protect air travelers and workers are now being reversed by the Trump administration.
The current administration has rolled back worker rights, rolled back consumer rights in order to give companies more power.
When it comes to air travel, a Department of Transportation rule that would have required airlines to pay customers for delays or cancellations is being scrapped. Danny Karen, an attorney who wrote a book about consumer protections, says this is like a get-out-of-jail-free card.
The rule being rolled back really would have given compensation to flyers for delayed and canceled flights, for international and domestic flights. Now they can't get it. So what's your remedy? What's your remedy if you're really screwed over?
Another rule no longer being pursued, a ban on non-compete agreements in the workplace. That would have made it easier for employees to leave one job and go to the next, even if they're under contract. The ban finalized last year by the Federal Trade Commission is now being abandoned by the same agency that created it. Economist Aaron Sojourner says this change will most likely affect hourly workers.
The typical worker with a non-compete is paid by the hour, and they make a median of about $14 an hour. So imagining that this is all executives and high-level scientists is completely wrong.
Now, an FTC official said there are laws to help workers who may want to leave their jobs and even go and start a new company if they're under a non-compete. And this official said the administration and the FTC in particular will be focusing on the laws that are on the books to help protect those employees, Del.
Scripps News legal affairs correspondent Avajoy Burnett for us. Avajoy, thank you very much. Those South Korean workers picked up in that immigration raid at an auto plant in Georgia will soon be on their way back home. There were more than 300 who were arrested. South Korea's government announcing the deal Sunday after negotiations with the United States. The workers were among hundreds detained Thursday at a Hyundai electric vehicle plant in Georgia.
So many of those individuals that were detained through that operation in Georgia, we are following the law. They are going to be deported. A few of those had criminal activity beyond just being here past final removal orders, and they will face the consequences for that. I think President Trump's message was powerful. His message today that he sent to the world was, listen, our laws will be enforced, and we're encouraging all companies who want to come to the United States and help us our economy and employ people, that we encourage them to employ U.S. citizens and to bring people to our country that want to follow our laws and work here the right way.
Scripps News national security correspondent Liz Landers is in our D.C. newsroom after breaking all of this down. And Liz, this actually sent shockwaves across South Korea because of the images that they saw. So what are they saying now?
Well, this was the largest immigration and customs enforcement operation in that agency's history, Del. And this happened just a few days ago on Thursday. 475 people were arrested, and as you mentioned, 300 of those were South Korean workers at this Hyundai plant outside of Savannah, Georgia. And over the weekend, South Korea's president ordered a major effort to bring the arrested workers home by sending a plane to pick them up. We're expecting that to arrive in the next day or two. And also, the South Korean foreign minister addressed this raid and arrests from Seoul during an emergency session before Parliament there. He said that he was deeply concerned by the incident. And Del, we're showing this video right now, and this is really the root of the concern here in South Korea, is these images of people being arrested with handcuffs and waist and ankle chains. That is apparently causing outrage in South Korea. And today, the foreign minister left South Korea earlier this morning, flying here to the United States. He's finishing up those diplomatic negotiations to release these 300 workers to take them back to South Korea. But Del, this all comes with the backdrop of a recent visit from the South Korean president just on August 25th. He was in the Oval Office with President Trump. They were talking about trade and defense deals. And at the time, there was a Boeing announcement made that Boeing was going to have another aircraft purchased by Korean Air. So another big U.S.-South Korean economic deal that was struck there, in addition to another $350 billion that the South Koreans have pledged in investments here. So a lot of both diplomatic defense. There are huge U.S. bases there to help protect across the entire Asia-Pacific region, in addition to all these economic questions too. So this is really creating some concerns in South Korea.
The other big news coming out of the White House, breaking news concerning the Epstein files.
Yeah, and this has to do with the relationship that the president had with Jeffrey Epstein. You remember earlier this summer, it was the Wall Street Journal that had reported on this note that they said that they had seen. It was, in their words, a body note. It was perhaps a little lewd. It had the outline of a woman, and they say it was ultimately signed by Donald Trump. The last line on this, and you're seeing it now on your screen, is happy birthday. This is for Epstein's 50th birthday, and Trump, as reported by the Wall Street Journal, was one of a number of people who had sent Epstein this sort of friendly and crude note. The last line is happy birthday, and may every day be another wonderful secret. So what we know now, this was reported over the summer, we didn't see the note, right. But House Democrats in the Oversight Committee just released what they say is the note, that they had gotten it from their investigation. Important to note here, though, Del, that the White House says that this is not the president's signature. Caroline Leavitt tweeting in response saying it's very clear that President Trump did not draw this picture and didn't sign it. And so they point to the signature itself, that sort of long line at the end of it. They say that's simply not how he signs his name. I'll leave that to the handwriting experts to give their analysis on that.
Thank you for joining us this evening for Today As It Happened. I'm Holly Furfer. We hope you have a great Monday night.